Welcome back, everybody, to our studies in GCSE history. We're continuing looking at the causes of the First World War, and this lesson is going to focus on the second Moroccan crisis, this one taking place in 1911. We will take a very, very brief overview of the first Moroccan crisis leading up to the Alcaraz conference, with France gaining an increased political influence in Morocco, and then we will think about how the second Moroccan crisis is ultimately happens, and then ultimately how this crisis is resolved and the historical significance therein. So, like I said, following the first Moroccan crisis, the resolution of the first Moroccan crisis, which takes place in 1905, 1906, and is resolved at the conference in 1906, we can see that despite the fact that Germany had hoped to try and increase tensions between the Anglo-France alliance, in fact what had happened is that Germany had become diplomatically isolated, with France gaining an increase in political influence in Morocco, while again Germany retaining some economic rights. Now, throughout the period intervening then, the period from 1905 all the way through to 1911, we can see that there are formalizations of their positions. Because in 1909, for example, France and Germany formally created this idea of special political interests in Morocco that were recognized alongside the rights that Germany was to have, which were special commercial rights. Despite these agreements, however, we can see that France continued to expand its influence, stoking German fears of encirclement and the loss of their great power status. This would therefore create greater amounts of Franco influence and expansion of Franco influence in the region. While all this is happening in Europe, in the sort of diplomatic halls of the great European cities, in early 1911 in Morocco, internal unrest is beginning to break out, especially around the capital city, Fez. This amplified the collapse of the central authority in the region. France would respond to this collapse with the internal unrest by dispatching approximately 20,000 troops to Fez in order to try and, at least the pretext is to protect European lives and to stabilize the area. However, in reality, Germany viewed this as a potential violation of the earlier agreements and really moved towards de facto annexation. So even though the pretext for the deploying of approximately 20,000 troops to Fez was in order to try and stabilize the area, Germany viewed it instead as a violation of earlier agreements and a move towards de facto annexation. So how does Germany respond then to thinking that France has violated her agreements? Well, on the 1st of July 1911, Germany escalated by sending the gunboat Panther to Agadir, which ultimately was seen as, again, used as a pretext for ostensibly safeguarding German citizens. However, the true aim of this particular move was diplomatic intimidation. They wanted to press for territorial compensation from France. Germany's Foreign Secretary, Alfred von Kindelin-Wachter, masterminded this entire strategy, which then started to stir nationalist fervour in Germany, but also alarmed other European powers. We can see here that you now have two militaries that are beginning to encroach on the territory of Morocco, competing against each other. You have the French military deploying 20,000 troops to Fez, and then you also have the Panther gunboat, German naval gunboat, also arriving in and around Morocco to try and also intimidate the French. This could spark out into full European conflict. And so the international reactions were very, very important. The move triggered a fierce reaction, particularly from Great Britain, who feared that a German naval foothold would provide for strategic access to Gibraltar in the Mediterranean. Again, quite problematic. Britain was fearing her own diplomatic isolation from the perspective of naval isolation. And so on the 21st of July 1911, the British Chancellor David Lloyd George delivered his dramatic Mansion House speech. This Mansion House speech essentially warned that Britain would not tolerate any compromise of her interests again escalating the tensions even further. The crisis then starts to deepen the rift between Germany on the one hand and the Anglo-French Entente on the other, which, again, against what Germany wishes, would just increasingly reinforce the alignment between Britain and France against Germany. The resolution then, after quite intense diplomatic back and forth, would be struck on the 4th of November 1911 with the Morocco-Congo Treaty, whereby France would gain full control over Morocco as a protectorate and Germany would receive territorial concessions in the French Congo. So a sort of giving of Congolese territory in response for more control over the territory of Morocco. These concessions were politically symbolic more than they were economically valuable. They allowed Germany to have a sort of saving of face in this entire crisis without actually going to war. But ultimately what had happened is Germany had backed down and had allowed France to take control over the Moroccan territory, something that Germany was ostensibly trying to prevent. Germany emerged diplomatically humiliated. It failed in its main objective of blocking French dominance in Morocco, and it reinforced the entente between Britain and France and further isolated Germany. In 1912, the Treaty of Fez further cemented this protectorate over Morocco, and again formally allowed for the colonial partition of the region, again leading to highlighting the relentless expansion of great power rivalries and demonstrating Germany's increasingly diplomatic isolation, as well as Britain's readiness to support France.